Hello and welcome back to Films on High. This is Dex.
This is Alex.
And today the film we're going to review is a dark crime comedy called Filth, directed by John S. Baird, coming out in 2013. This stars James McAvoy, Jamie Bell, Joanne Froggatt, and Imogen Poots. A disheveled and drug-addled detective is on a case of a murder scene gone in a tunnel a couple of days ago, and is on the case. However, he goes down into a spiral of insanity and depravity to the point where he kind of loses reality, a touch of reality. Will he make it out, and will he be able to crack the case? So, what do you think of the film?
Well, this is a case where it's kind of close to me in ways because I'm a pretty big fan of Irvin Welsh's books. I read quite a few of them when I was in high school. He was kind of high school, too young to be reading this kind of stuff. But anyway, he was a pretty big influence on me, like just in my tastes in terms of what I like to read and also my own writing. So I'm a big fan of his, and I've internalized a lot of his earlier work especially. It's just kind of become part of me because I've read it so much. And Filth is no exception. That's a book I remember reading. I haven't read it in a while, but I do have pretty vivid memories of it. It's a pretty messed up and dark book, but that's kind of typical of Welsh's style. I was kind of apprehensive about seeing this movie. Like, I remember hearing years ago that they made an adaptation of it. And again, because like Welsh's work is so kind of close to me in those ways, and I'm so acquainted with it, I kind of wasn't really interested in seeing the adaptation because I just got a kind of a look at the trailer and like a sense of I just felt like there was no way they were going to be able to really replicate the dark material that was in the book. So I figured, I'll give that a pass. So now, years later, finally sitting down to watch it, and it was pretty good. Like, it was a decent enough adaptation, maybe as good of an adaptation as we could have hoped for this kind of material. We've got the story of this character, Bruce Robertson, detective sergeant, Scottish police officer, detective, and he's a pretty amoral guy. Like, the story obviously kind of echoes, like, Bad Lieutenant, the classic Abel Ferrara movie, and many stories we've seen of kind of out of control, corrupt detectives who are just kind of mad on power and really debauched. But the book also has kind of an element of dark comedy, and so does the film. Like, the character of Bruce Robertson, he's this really grotesque guy, really has these kind of degenerate sexual appetites, heavy drug and alcohol user, and beside all that is just kind of a petty, cruel man. He's obsessed with these things he calls the games, which are essentially his own sort of self-created rituals that he sort of performs of humiliating and debasing everyone in his orbit, particularly his colleagues, finding ways to undermine and undercut them, pranking them or just embarrassing them, screwing them over, and, his assorted sort of sexual escapades. Just his kind of way of adding, fun to his life, his own kind of depraved search of pleasure. But we also get some glimpses into his personal life, his relationship with his wife Carol and his young daughter Stacy, some of these kind of insights into what's going on beneath the surface. And the main drive of the plot is he's investigating this recent murder, which was apparently some kind of racially motivated hate crime, which is ironic because Robertson himself is quite racist in his attitudes. He's just a really unpleasant guy all around. But we also have the other plot of him wanting to get a promotion, wanting to get this promotion from detective sergeant to detective inspector, and how this is almost like a deeply pathological thing with him. He's so determined to make it happen, but he's also just kind of a blatantly corrupt guy. And as tends to happen in stories like this, and, generally in real life, the excess starts to catch up with him and sort of tear him apart. And also, we get glimpses into this really disturbed mindset that he has. And this is a difficult thing to kind of like approach in a film, because even just the idea of trying to make a movie out of this book, it's a pretty bold thing, because there are some things in the book that are rather kind of exclusive to the book that are difficult to depict in a film. Like, the book is a really kind of subjective experience. You know, it's this first person story of him going through his life. But there's also like layers of other things going on that don't become apparent until later in the story. And I do like how they depicted some of those elements. They did a good job at depicting some of the more weirder subversive elements. But there are some elements that were lacking. Most obviously, of course, the tapeworm. In the book, there's a whole subplot where Bruce ingests some bad food and he ends up getting a tapeworm inside of his stomach. And this tapeworm ends up becoming a narrator in the story itself. Periodically in the book, the text is broken up with the tapeworm narrating its own sort of dialogue. And as the story goes on, the tapeworm gets bigger and the narration starts to take up more and more of the story. It's an interesting little literary device they do in the book. And it also sort of gives us insight into Bruce Robertson's character, because the tapeworm, as it spends more time inside of him, it starts to gain more knowledge about him and insight into his past. So that was an interesting thing they did in the book, where relaying information about this character through this, you know, unexpected means, having this kind of tapeworm inside of this guy actually narrating the story. That I found one of the most interesting aspects of the book. Like, to me, that is what makes the story unique and elevates it beyond just this kind of dark comedic story of a corrupt cop. They didn't really do that in the movie, unfortunately, and I can see why, because that's a difficult thing to represent cinematically. I think there are ways they could have gone about it. They did sort of do something as a compromise where we get these surreal sequences where he's talking to a doctor, and they do use the imagery of the tapeworm occasionally, almost as a little bit of an Easter egg for fans of the book, but it did kind of disappoint me that they left that out, because to me that was such a unique aspect of the book. But, you know, that I can sort of live with. They still tried to really dive into the twisted mindset of this guy, and even though they do cut out some of the more extreme, depraved things that happen, they still kept quite a few of the things from the book, like a few of the shady things he does, and like the general, like the subplot involving a friend of his, Clifford Blades, who's kind of like this sort of wealthy but kind of, you know, nebbishy, awkward guy that he just relentlessly kind of bullies and screws over really egregiously. Like, it gives you an insight into this guy's mindset, where not only is he like a corrupt and kind of evil guy, like he does some things in the story that are just really bad and like objectively bad, but also just small petty things, like, you know, wanting to just take petty revenge on people and ruin their lives and harm them for like no reason. Like, those aspects I feel like the movie captured. And also, as it goes on, it becomes apparent that he's sort of not entirely sane or stable, I guess, and that there's something greater going on. You know, there's this sort of delusion that he's wrapped up into. And again, that's a difficult thing to sort of represent in film, but I like the way they went about it. They kept a touch of surrealism, too. Like, the whole use of animal metaphors, like obviously the one of the most persistent things we see in the film is occasionally Robertson looks in the mirror and he sees himself with this kind of grotesque pig head. And that actually recalls an image from the printing of Filth. Like, one of the first printings of Filth, paperback, I think, the cover image was this kind of cartoon pig wearing a police hat. So I feel like that image was kind of recalling that particular image that was associated with the book. But we also see this with, like, he sees other people depicted as animals as well, so they sort of took that a step further. It's a bit odd and on the nose, but again, it works for the kind of surreal tone they're going for and kind of giving you a sense that this guy is not entirely... He doesn't have all of his marbles going, so it works on a few levels. James McAvoy. I think James McAvoy's a good actor. I wasn't entirely sure if he was a good choice for this character. He is Scottish, so he does have the pedigree. But when I read the book, I sort of pictured Bruce Robertson as a more grotesque guy, maybe a bit more like overweight and not as conventionally attractive, because, you know, James McAvoy still has that movie star thing going on. He does make himself look a bit, you know, rough in the movie with the slick back hair and the beard. He looks a bit sleazy, so he went for it and tried to embody the character. And his commitment to the performance, he does do a pretty good job. Like, you know, he goes for the the gross aspect of the character, the pettiness, and also just the more unhinged quality. Like, there are some moments where he did kind of surprise me with how far he was willing to commit to it. So I'll say overall he did a pretty good job. Like, he kind of surprised me. I didn't think he would be that effective in the lead role, but he did a pretty good job as Bruce Robertson. And we got a good supporting cast here too. Some good like British, Scottish actors who have become familiar. Eddie Marzan playing Blades, his best friend, and it's Imogen Poots as one of his co-workers. So we got Jamie Bell also as Ray Lennox, he also ends up being kind of he was also a lead character in some of the books that Irvin Welsh wrote later. So he's kind of an interesting character too, just to highlight him. So there's a good cast going on, and it like, one thing I didn't like, it felt like they almost put like a Hollywood gloss over it. Like, it doesn't have the grit that something like Trainspotting has. It does feel like maybe they were going for a bit more of like I won't say like Hollywood, but maybe a bit more conventional, but on the whole still a pretty strong adaptation.
Seeing this film just as a movie itself without reading the books was quite an experience. Just as McAvoy, I've seen him as more of the, you could say, hero type, anti-hero, whatever it would be. But
Clean cut.
Clean cut type of character. Seeing him in this role, it was a nice...
Playing against type,
a nice breath of fresh air. Just as getting to see him playing a sleazy guy that will almost do anything to get that promotion, to basically be the new boss of his motley crew, even though he's the biggest dick and basically a shit sticker, or like instigator, basically being a piece of shit, because at every turn where he has a choice of doing a good thing or a bad thing, he chooses for the worst thing in order to make sure that he gets a good laugh and that he feels himself as superior. And in our day and age, especially watching this 12 years later from when it came out, I can see where a type of guy like that doesn't exactly fit the mold of how the world works.
Well, no shit.
Especially with how much of an asshole he can be. And they take it pretty somewhere far in this film. But one thing I do like, although it does have the Hollywood gloss, it does have this almost high octane type of feel of, almost getting us to feel the high and the rush that he's feeling. And
it has that energy, the cocaine sort of,
And so as the movie goes on and you get to see him break down even more, you get to see the movie kind of almost simulate exactly what he's feeling in terms of a visual sense. And I felt like, okay, that's kind of a cool trick. And so all in all, with this whole movie as a whole package, it's something I would love to watch twice, just to really get a good impact of like, what did I just watch, and did they actually get away with doing something like this? As you say, it's not dark enough. I say this is plenty dark.
It's plenty dark, but again, just as someone who's read the book and his experience with Irvin Welsh's work, because this is the kind of thing he does. He just writes about really horrible people doing like the worst things you can imagine, kind of like unveiling the worst of the human condition. So, and again, it's a question of how much you can get away with. And they did still put some of the the edgier stuff in the movie, which I was surprised by. So they did a pretty good job with that overall, and it does still have that distinctly Scottish identity. Like, even though they did maybe put a bit too much of a gloss over it, it's not like an American corrupt cop movie, because, in Scotland, most cops generally don't carry guns, and they're not getting into shootouts all the time. So it's not like an American sort of corrupt cop movie, which has a bit more action and stuff like that, or violence. Here, it's almost more like psychological, the kind of games he's playing, the pettiness and the power games. So it goes into like this more kind of, I guess you could say, personal abuse of power, and a portrait of like, just this sort of scumbag guy unraveling. Another issue I had with it, occasionally it maybe gets a bit too sentimental, especially towards the end, because again, there are things in the book that they obviously couldn't represent. They tried to do a good enough job, but again, the absence of the tapeworm. I know it sounds weird that I'm harping on about the tapeworm, but in the book, the tapeworm is a really important part. But just leaving that out, you definitely lose a bit of that insight and a bit of understanding of why this guy is the way he is. Like, in some ways, I almost feel like they were more interested in just making, like, corrupt cop movies, showing him going around doing fucked up things. They did go into some of the deeper stuff. Like, obviously, one of the bigger aspects is his wife, like, the whole character of Carol. We see her throughout the film, and she's depicted in this sort of odd way where she's monologuing directly to the camera. And we never see her elsewhere in the film. We never see her around Bruce at any point. We just see her in these kind of weird, almost fantastical little sequences. And then later on, we find out that we haven't even been seeing Carol. Bruce has descended into such insanity and loneliness since he's been separated from her that he is literally dressing up as Carol and pretending to be her and going off and stalking the streets in almost these weird disassociative states. So again, that's something that happens in the book, and that is like a weird, that is a weird way for the plot to go. So I respect them for keeping that in the movie, and it's as good as an adaptation I could have hoped for. McAvoy does a good job. They preserved like a lot of the weirder, edgier material. Like, maybe towards the end they did get bogged down by a bit of sentimentality. They tried to make you feel sorry for him, but I guess you got to do that to offset the darkness, because again, it is like a really dark sort of story. And even in the book you get that sense where in the book it starts off more black comedy. Like, you see this guy doing fucked up stuff, but it's kind of funny, like in just a dark antisocial way. But then towards the end it starts to get like dark in a not funny way, where you're getting like, you're finding out why this guy is the way he is, and he's just so depressed and sad and broken. They did some of that in the movie, but again, it almost feels like they let him off the hook a bit too easily. But I can see why this movie would have like an appeal to people, like just as a weird, different sort of take on this kind of material. It has that sort of cult aspect to it. Again, maybe it doesn't have like the same appeal or energy of something that Trainspotting has, but as someone who is a dedicated Welsh fan and has read like a lot of his work, I was satisfied with it.
Overall, a movie like this, I would give it a solid 3.5 out of 5. It's one of those types of quirky, dark comedy movies where it's not exactly something that you'll find yourself reflecting upon yourself of, wondering to yourself, are you an asshole or not? But, and if you do think like, oh shit, I relate to this guy, then ask yourself some questions. But overall, it's a nice way to depict the more darker side of humanity in a funny, not funny type of way where you're not left scarred by the movie.
Yeah, well, maybe we should have been. Maybe there should have been more mental scarring going on, but that's just me. That's how I like it. But yeah, I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5 as well. I did enjoy it. It's a nice little slice of, degenerate, corrupt cop, Scottish madness, and a nice adaptation of a book that I really do enjoy. Maybe again, they sort of wimped out in some ways, but they also didn't completely ruin it. Like, I like how they did actually sit down and try to work this out, because even though it is just kind of this story of this asshole corrupt cop who's just really degenerate and really shitty, there are like psychological layers going on, which is often the case in Welsh's work. Like, Trainspotting seems like it's just a story about junkies, but there's more going on. Like, it's actually kind of the story of a community and like a way of life. And this movie too, it's not just a depiction of like this, comedic sociopathic asshole cop. Like, it is the story of a guy who is broken and traumatized, and he's acting out because of that. And James McAvoy, to his credit, does a good job at communicating those nuances. And the film covers all the ground I would have wanted to cover, except for that damn tapeworm. You should have included the tapeworm, guys, but, besides that, pretty strong adaptation.
For a film like this, it's a marvel that we would get something like this, especially back in the 2010s. There were dark movies, of course, like, one for aforementioned Killer Joe, which kind of this movie reminded me of, but they both had their own aspects. They both had their own stories to tell, and it's refreshing to get to see a movie like this, especially during that era. We had a lot of Marvel superhero films, so it was a lot of campiness. So getting to see the darker side was pretty good, and getting to see those weird scenes with the animals, the pseudo tapeworm that they had with the kooky doctor. It was kooky and quirky enough to just be like, this felt like a trip of a movie to watch, but I guess it did have some sort of point to it, which I can appreciate because a lot of movies don't a lot nowadays. So it's something that again I find very refreshing.
Well said. And if anybody out there has balls, they'll make an adaptation of Marabou Stork Nightmares. That'll freak people out. Now that's dark. But if you're hankering for something kind of dark and weird and off the wall, I think Filth is a good movie to check out.
So, have you seen Filth? Have you read any of Welsh's books before? Let us know down in the comments down below. Till then, it's been Film on High.
Peace.
Later.